Hey there, my fellow fans. This is James, and welcome to Random Fandom. Happy New Year? I think it's a little late to say that. We're already several weeks into this wacky year, and so much has happened already. Uh, I know it's been a long time since our last episode. I really apologize for that. Derek and I are both in industries that are just full on busy right now. A lot of people need and are demanding entertainment. To that end, I think I should probably focus a little bit more on this podcast because we started it in order to encourage and motivate and inspire people in their art in the midst of lockdowns. Speaking of lockdowns, we've just locked down again here in Tokyo. I'm stuck at home with some screaming kids in the background, so if you hear that, you'll know what it is. I think this is probably take 726 of this intro, but I'm just going to go with it because, hey, there it is. Today, we get to talk to Mr. Nick Maley. Now, Derek and I recorded this several months back, as most of our interviews have been, but today's talk is a talk that kind of endures for a long time. Mr. Maley's work has endured for a very long time, and it will continue to do so. If you don't know who he is, you might know him as that Yoda guy. Mr. Maley worked with Stuart Freeborn and Frank Oz and his team, George Lucas, on creating Yoda in the original Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And when I was growing up, Yoda, I didn't think of him as a puppet. He's very real to me and had such an impact on my life that it's very inspiring and just awe-inspiring, kind of breathtaking, in fact, to think that the things that we can make with our hands can come to such life that they really can change a person's life. Like when I saw Yoda on screen, I thought, there are aliens out there. I was 7, But what I mean is, he was so real to me that I think from that minute I knew what I wanted to do in life. And it really, your artwork can move and motivate people to such extremes that I don't think we ever really realize the impact that we have on other people. And Derek and I, we love you guys. We want everybody to be able to share and express themselves in ways that are, whether it's moving simply to your own children or to your neighbor, to your partner, whoever it may be, it is important in, these really dark times when everybody's so afraid of getting sick or whatever else is out in the world. Our internal mechanisms, our hearts, really need to be shared. And art is still, I think, one of the best ways to do that. So we want to encourage you guys to continue making great art and continue to do all this fantastic stuff like my kids are in the background. So at any rate, let's get on with it. Today, that Yoda guy, Mr. Nick Maley. Enjoy. Welcome. This is Random Fandom. I'm James, Derek, and we are honored this week to have a fantastic guest, Mr. Nick Maley. Sir, how are you?
I'm good.
It's
How
good
are
to
you?
see you. Doing well.
It's a pleasure, sir. Like I said, I've followed your progress to try to bring back the Yoda puppet and to its full glory of what it was. I mean, I think most people will agree that was a game changer for a puppet performance for everyone. And magic happened from the design to the build to the costume to the performer, everything coming together. So
Yeah, well, Yoda was the world's first animatronic superstar. He was maybe 2 years before Dark Crystal and Labyrinth when we had, you know, puppet performers, but we, you know, we didn't have any of that at the time, and everyone was worried. Kirsch actually said that Yoda scared him because he feared that, you know, he would put this thing into a major motion picture, spend millions of dollars, and everyone would laugh at it because it was basically a Muppet in the middle of a movie.
It didn't look like a Muppet.
What my boss Stuart was designing, and what I contributed was cutting edge at the time. Of course, there wasn't just one Yoda. There were 4 Yodas that we used in different ways for different shots. And but you know, you can't get past the performance that first of all Frank Oz led. Frank was Yoda's, you know, or rather Frank's right arm was Yoda, basically. And he directed the other puppeteers who got no credit at all for about 25 years. I put up a website in the mid 90s when websites were kind of new, and one of the things that I did there was I talked about all the other people that were involved in building Yoda and also in operating Yoda, because archives are really built around what publicity goes out, and Frank was famous and the other puppeteers weren't, so everybody interviewed Frank, and no one actually asked if there were any other puppeteers, right, even though it's very clear that if this is Yoda's, you know, if this is Frank's right arm, then that's Yoda's neck, and that's Yoda's jaw, and that's Yoda's lips, and this is Yoda's eyebrows. But who's operating his eyes, and who's operating his eyelids, and who's operating his ears, and his who's hand. Operating his right hand, right? You know, that's what it comes down to. So if it wasn't for the way that they did that they treated him like an acting performance rather than like Miss Piggy, I don't think it would have come off in any way as well as it actually did. And a lot of credit to Kirsch for giving Frank the time to give that performance. I think one of the things in The Last Jedi was that Yoda was really rushed. I think maybe the director was a bit scared of him in that too. And we just kind of jumped in, and we got a couple of lines, and we jumped out, and there was a little laugh, and then we set fire to the temple. And you know, would we have loved Yoda the way that we do if you hadn't had that time of spent the time holding on Yoda, with him being disappointed with Luke, with him concentrating and lifting the you know, if you'd sped up the whole thing of lifting the X-Wing out of the swamp, it would have lost a lot. And so it took courage, I'm sure, for him to hold on that puppet as long as he did. The first day's filming, Frank realized that what he was doing, or what they were doing, was way too big, and they filmed it again because he recognized that, you know, for this to be a believable movie character, he needed to tone it down and tone it down. And the same thing when I go to conventions with the V1 Lite, V2 Lite, which is what I call the puppet I've got now, which is, you know, it takes 4 puppeteers to operate Yoda. And when I go to a convention, I can't pick up 3 people and just say, oh, grab that lever. So I have a kind of a light version that has a little less movement, that can, you know, be operated like a one-man band. And so, but when I take that, you know, the first few times, I realized, you know, I was going over the top with him too. You know, it's too easy to you know, to overdo those movements, and particularly the mouth movements. You know, you think you're hardly moving your hand at all, but it's much more believable.
Right. It becomes more puppet, Muppet-esque.
Yes.
Yeah.
It becomes Grover.
Well,
Becomes
they were
Grover.
talking about that with the Dark Crystal, that a lot of the traditional puppeteers would take the Gelflings and walk them in, and it was too
Right.
much. So they pinned it to their side and walked in normally,
Right.
and their normal footsteps translated to.
You should tell Nick. Derek has quite a bit of puppeteering expertise. Well, experience anyway. I would say expertise, but you know, he would say experience. And we interviewed BJ Geyer, who's a very prominent puppeteer these days. Puppeteering is not
He was a
easy.
puppeteer too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. He was. I wanted to clear something up. A lot of people who don't know anything about Empire Strikes Back, well, I don't know who that would be. They're living under a rock. But you're talking about Irvin Kershner, the director, and he passed away in 2010. But when you say Kirsch, that's who you're talking about.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I think I can say unabashedly, I feel like he was a driving force behind that being one of the best movies in the entire saga.
Oh,
I think it is the best in the entire saga.
I do too. Yeah, it's my favorite.
Yeah.
Because it has its action and it has its excitement, but it has very solid character development and movement through the stuff. It was a long time before I discovered that he was George Lucas's professor at college.
Yeah.
And so you know, that made some sense when I looked at it, because he was you know, he had a certain old school style. I mean, he wasn't the kind of guy that you would look at and say, oh yeah, he's going to make a great science fiction movie. I mean, he just wasn't, right? But he did a great job.
He looked like he would have done a great swashbuckler movie. He's the kind of guy, you look at him and he looks like he would be directing Errol Flynn.
Well, you know, and I'll say something controversial, because a lot of people going back and forth, oh, George is a genius and George messed up this. I gotta say, that choice of having Irving Kershner come in to direct that second film, after being that first one being such a hit, I know that George put so much of himself into that first one that, you know, he needed some help. Kudos to him for going and getting that help. Because
well, there's
it was kind of odd, really, in a way. I mean, I wasn't there when he said it, but you know, one of the things that surprised me when we got on, yes, right, it surprised me when we got onto the second movie, was that George had said to someone that the best thing about the original Star Wars was that it meant he would never have to direct another movie again. He really struggled with the whole experience. He didn't like. I had one of the people I was interviewing on our broadcast that we do every month on Starnet events, was the managing director at 20th Century Fox when they made the first movie. And one of the things he said was that, you know, George kept coming to him and saying, but the crew keeps asking me questions. Right? And he said, well, that's what they do. You know, you have to tell them what you want and they will go on and get on with it. He was a very incommunicative guy, and he would have dialogue coaches that were there basically directing the actors. I mean, he would say bigger or smaller. That was about it, really. You know, he was a genius to put together a lot of different things that had been done in different movies, but not all in one movie. He was brilliant in to bring all of those things together that was so that made a movie that changed the way that movies were made. he was even more brilliant as a business person in terms of, of the way he pushed the merchandising afterwards.
Yeah.
Charles
Yeah.
Lippincott, who's just recently died, was the guy that was doing those early merchandising deals, and he wasn't happy with Charles because he didn't feel like he was getting, enough out of the toy companies and out of Marvel, but it was a completely unknown movie. You can't say to
Right.
Marvel, I want X amount of dollars from your comics, when they've got all the production costs of the comics and maybe the movie flops. So, so the toy manufacturers were saying, well, we have to sell this number of items before we give you anything, which
Did
George
you ever
didn't.
see?
He sure as hell made up for it on the second and the third movies.
They sure did. Did you ever see? There's a show on Netflix called The Toys That Made Us.
Yeah.
And they talk about this saga.
This is a BBC. Is it a BBC?
It's on Netflix. It's on Netflix.
I know it's on Netflix, but is it?
Oh, it may be. Yeah, it may be a BBC.
I don't know, because I have a co-host on Starnet events who made the Galaxy that Britain built, and also a documentary about the making of the first Star Wars toys. But I think
so maybe that's it. Yeah.
So I was wondering if it was the same documentary.
Well, this is this documentary it actually covers several toys. So each episode, I think there are 4 or 5 episodes a year.
Okay.
But it covers, I think the first one was Star Wars, and then it goes through G.I. Joe and Barbie and He-Man.
It's something else.
It's toys from the 1970s and 80s, and it talks very much about why Star Wars characters are this big. The guy from Kenner, he had massive meaty hands, and he just went, make them this big, and he just like stuck his hand on the table, and there it was. And because you had these big G.I. Joe dolls,
they were like
figures
12.
that were like 12 inches. And I had like all of those versions of the Star Wars characters for a long time. I think my brother sold them on eBay like probably 3 years before the next series came out, and he could have, and he's like, I got like $50 I can send you, and I was like, I was so mad. I mean, he had IG-88, he had all anyway. Those toys were I think probably one of the most important money makers financially for the whole series.
Oh yeah.
But as soon as Yoda hit the screen, man, that blew everything out of the water.
I was looking up the merchandising numbers a couple of years ago, and it was talking about how much money the merchandising had turned over in the first 2 years of Disney. And Disney doesn't get all of that money because they license the making of shirts to this guy, and the making of arts to that guy, and the making of something else to someone else. And but when you look at it, the first couple of Disney movies, turned over a couple of $1 billion, and you say, wow, it was a couple of $1 billion. That was amazing. But in the same period of time, the toys and the shirts and the sheets and whatever else turned over $500 billion.
Wow.
That is effectively something in the region of $50,000 a second.
Yeah. And it still continues to.
And it goes on and on. That's why I really believe that is why every time you have a new movie, you have a whole bunch of new characters. It's because they want to sell, they think, well, we've already sold R2-D2 to that guy down the street. Now we've got to sell him all these new characters, right? Yep. So we've got to have a new robot, and we've got to have a new heroine, and we've got to have a new whatever.
So Derek was saying I'm going to say something controversial earlier. I'm going to say something now. I'll be honest. As much as there is great genius behind the franchise as a franchise, like monetarily speaking. I do really wish they could kind of stick to a certain number of characters and just let those characters develop themselves and play out. But then,
Evolve.
and yeah, and then they say, okay, well, in the prequels, let's show how C-3PO was actually made by Anakin. And I'm like, come on. I mean, as much as I love C-3PO. And he's like, thank the maker. Oh, well, that turns out it's Anakin. So lucky you. What? Come on. It's just too much. And I get why they did it, but and everybody's gonna hate me for this. So all our listeners, come at me. But there it is. You got a visitor.
Ah, you came back.
I wish they really had kind of stuck with you know, seeing everybody's character arc flow, and they did a lot, but then they keep adding in, now you got Baba Frick and
I don't
Baby
want to be.
Yoda.
I really don't want to be critical. I think that there are those people who were, deeply disappointed with the new movies. Those same people are largely very happy with The Mandalorian. And so as long as there is something for them, maybe our younger people who think of those old characters as old characters, they may have been introduced just at the back end of that. And
Right.
I'm sure that Disney are really focusing on gaining those new fans who are going to keep them in Lemonade for the next 50 years,
Yeah, my
rather
daughter's
than old fans that are all going to die off in the next 20 years. So
yeah, my daughters love
and
BB-8.
I
They just love
understand
BB-8 more than anybody else. So
I
I
understand
think
where that's at, but I do think, for me, I don't understand how you could describe the last three movies as being part of a Skywalker saga, since they were about two other people.
It was the handing off. I think they were trying to say, okay, we're somehow connected to the old, but forget about them. And here we go with this new group.
Yeah, that's exactly what they were doing. But
Yeah.
how do you say this is the end of the Skywalker saga when it's really, about two other people? Just because it's like me saying, "Oh, well, I'm really Nick Trump." That doesn't make me Nick Trump, right? so, but I was not thrilled. I was not thrilled with the latest movies.
Yeah.
I thought they started promisingly, but I felt once again I would have liked to have seen a rounding off of that original story, and then they can go off with a Star Wars story in whatever tangents they want to go.
Sure.
right.
And I think a lot of old fans feel that way. I think a lot of old fans were disappointed with what they did with Luke and what they did with.
Well, when you find out that Mark Hamill was disappointed with what they did with Luke.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's funny because I started thinking most of my complaints, like if I have complaints, they're just grumpy old men complaints. And because my kids absolutely love BB-8. They love Baba Frick. They love Baby Yoda. And they love Yoda. I mean, I get Master Yoga.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, I like Baby Yoda too. I think I really like him.
I'll send you one.
I would like that. He doesn't. His head shape, his skull seems to be the wrong shape for him to be actually the same species. And his eyes are so different, being blacked out. Well, it's not that they're blacked out. They look like they're blacked out, but there is an iris and a pupil there, like a dog's eye.
Right.
But I think he's a subspecies. I think he's a cross between Yoda and someone from Area 52.
Well, Disney has in the last several years gone the route of, and if you walk into the Disney store, they sell the Animator Collection, and the Animator Collection is all the Disney princesses in a baby version. Now, what they've done is since 2000 and maybe 5 or so, they've switched from promoting movies to promoting the characters. That way, whatever movie they're in, you'll go watch it because you like the characters, which I think is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. But they'll also, in every movie since then, they have a scene where the main character is a child, whether it's Merida, or
Moana.
yeah, Moana's like that. They all have just at least one scene where the character's a child. And so you kind of go, I want that doll too. And this is kind of what they've done. They've taken Yoda and said, I want to babyfy him. And they did animator's an animator's special, an animator's version of Yoda. And they just took his eyes and just made him, they Pikachu'd him. I don't know if you know who Pikachu
they
is.
did build him. He is a puppet.
Yes.
Yeah.
he's a-
Yeah. We know some of the folks who.
Well, Dave
on that.
Filoni is an old friend of ours, and he's a fan's fan. You know, he started off. Matter of fact, he and my wife and I went to opening night of the Revenge of the Jedi, or Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the
Didn't
Sith.
your wife make his robe?
Yeah, she made his robes, which she was mortified because she made him robes. Then he went and directed at Lucas. And while he was directing at Lucas, he had put the robes my wife made on a mannequin outside his office. So then he called us and said, "Hey, George was looking at your robes, Crystal." And she was mortified. She's like, "I would have done a better job if I thought George was actually going to be, looking at my work." But yeah, he's a fan. So he wanted the real puppet. He wanted an actual thing for the cast to interact with. Right. So I think and coming back to that, I think it's important for our viewers and listeners to sort of know your background. I mean, we jumped right into it because we know you, we know your work, we love your work. Sure. But should we rewind a little, and where did you start working up to where?
Yeah. Well, first of all, my name's Nick Maley. People call me that Yoda guy because I've been involved in building Yoda. I didn't design Yoda. I worked with Stuart Freeborn, who was my mentor for about 7 years. I started making movies in 1969, which is scary when you realize that's 51 years ago. But did a movie with Charlton Heston as Julius, as Mark Antony in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, if you can imagine that. And so I made different basic. I was a makeup artist, so. But I'm bored easily. I don't get off on making pretty people prettier. I can do it for a little while, but I was really a character makeup artist originally from theater. So I wanted to look at character and the development of character, being able to take your face and bring out the elements in your face that make you look evil, and you add your performance to that. Yes, exactly. And similarly to be able to bring out elements in your face that people would automatically say, "Oh, he's a nice guy," based on basic physiognomy, which is what cartoons are based on, etc. So basically, I started to play around with that. I wanted to get into creature effects. Everybody said to me, well, at that time, actually, it wasn't really creature effects. It was prosthetic effects, old age makeups and people with scars and various other things. I mean, you had the characters from the Black Lagoon that were before my time, but that was about the standard of what people did for creatures, and it was really more of a costume and a pullover mask than.
I think for me as a child, it was the Little Big Man makeup that sort of.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Yeah, and I became very good friends with Dick Smith over the years, basically because of that job that he did, and so I started to target the guys who were doing that. People said, "Oh, you'll never catch up with them. They've been doing it for 30 years. You shouldn't bother, right?" Well, you know, as I say in my book, you know, you can't you can't live an extraordinary life without making an extraordinary effort. And so, you know, I pursued,
Yeah.
basically stalked Stu for a while, and eventually I worked with him on in 1971 on a movie about Winston Churchill, where we were doing beard work and other stuff. And it was another few years before his son, who I had befriended, encouraged him to include me in the Mos Eisley for the team for the Mos Eisley Cantina. I had worked with his son on a horror film and on some Pils Lager ads where we had a bar. We had Donald Pleasance in a bar drinking lager with the Mummy and with Frankenstein.
Oh,
and
cool.
you know, it was just fun. And so having done that, I basically joined the team as the junior on the first Star Wars movie. We built the creatures for Mos Eisley, and I can't claim much of that as being entirely mine, because I was the new kid on the block and they didn't trust me to do too much. So I contributed to almost everything that was in the principal photography shoot, and made all the prosthetics for the uglies, and the smoker at the end of the bar was my first on-screen prosthetics.
Oh, that's
And so then we left that, we went and did a job for Gene Roddenberry. I guess we'd be considered traitorous now, but we did a job for Gene Roddenberry, and then we went on to Superman 1 and 2. And so by the time we came back to Empire Strikes Back, I was a senior member of the team, and Stu liked to keep his teams, his crew small. And so that basically meant that while he was working on devising what Yoda was going to be, I was the guy left in supervising the workshop. And so I made a lot of movies over the years. I was the only person who worked on all 4 versions of Yoda. And I devised the final puppet, which you see in 80% of the movie.
I wanted to ask you something about that puppet mechanics when you I don't know if it's a tangent now or not, but as you were working on the inside of that puppet, what was it that inspired how you create, or how you set up the mechanics of that? Because, for instance, the wrinkles around his eyes, I heard, you know, this inspired by Einstein. I heard all these different things, but the actual structure of his face, it allows for certain movements, because, you know, I mean, how he scrunches his face up and he's like, you know, he gets real disappointed and stuff. And Frank does a great job of that, but that wouldn't have been possible without your work actually, in there.
Let me straighten that out. There were certain elements that Frank wanted within the puppet that were in the prototype which Stu built, and which I automatically included in the backup Yoda, which I built. Stu did a brilliant job of sculpting Yoda. It took him forever, but it was, I mean, he did a really great job. I think Yoda, as a character guy, you know, Yoda's physiognomy has everything already in it. He, you know, he has smiling eyes, but he has sallow cheeks. He isn't a round, cuddly, funny, laughy character until you make him do that. You know, he has frown lines, but which are opposed to his smile lines. You know, when you look at Grandma, you can see all kinds of elements in Grandma's face that actually tell you about how she lived her life. and the different experiences she had, and the elements that Stu sculpted into Yoda's face really make you believe that he has seen a lot in his time, and he doesn't need to be resculpted to be angry. You just have to activate that part of his face. So getting back to your question, Frank wanted to be able to physically operate the eyebrows. He had it, I believe, in his mind to be able to do that scrunchy look. When we were building him, Stu had imagined, putting a jawbone on, because if you think of Chewbacca has a full skull underneath, and Peter's jaw would operate Chewbacca's jaw,
Right.
but it was really a transference of those movements. Frank said, no, he didn't want a jawbone. That's why I think Yoda's face looked different in The Last Jedi, because if you don't position the hand in exactly the same position that it's in the first puppet, then it either pushes the jaw, the mouth forward, or pulls it backwards. And so it's really critical. What's on the inside is as critical as what's on the outside. So he had a system that they used with the Muppets, and so we took elements from what they were doing with the Muppets and incorporated them in. And what Stu was trying to do was build a really heavily, a very, I use the word heavily and that gives the wrong impression, a super lightweight, very engineered mechanism that would allow Frank's hand to pass through the middle of it to get to the eyebrows. That was the big hold up thing. And Stu also wanted, you never saw it in the movie, but he wanted Yoda to be able to change focus. So he had a mechanism inside that allowed the pupils to go in, to look closer and to look further away. But Frank never operated that. And I think occasionally he accidentally hit that, because there are times in Yoda's hut where he looks a bit cross-eyed. And that's basically because that adjustment has been made accidentally. Yeah, when you're talking to me about how did I think about it, the Yoda that I built, which was a backup, was built in a real hurry. And so for me, I had seen what Stu was building. I had seen what he was doing, and I had seen how he was laboring over it. And I knew that I didn't have the time for a backup to do any of the things that he was doing. And so for me, all I was thinking about was, how am I going to build this in 3 days? And so
3 days. Well, thank you for your honesty, sir.
So what I did was I did the opposite to what Stu was doing. He was building a fine mechanism that could be taken out and put in. I built something straight into the skull that was a fixed item that, literally, rather than saying I'm going to get a bracket here and I'm going to fix 2 screws there and I need to make a fitting to get this fitting over there, I just took a bunch of acrylic the tube straight into the inside of the skull and bent the end round and said, okay, that's gonna pull from there and that'll do that. What I wanted was just something that was going to work, because Stu had spent so long with, not just, it sounds like I'm blaming Stu for that. I'm not. They could not make up their mind what Yoda was going to look like. And so we had 10 months to build Yoda and film him. So we had basically like 8 months to build him. And they spent 5 months deciding what he was going to look like. It took at least 3 weeks for us to make the molds and produce the component parts to start to put something together. So, that really left him with a very small amount of time to figure out how to do this heavily engineered piece that he was doing for the
And you
world's
did yours
first
in 3
animatronic
days.
star.
And you
And
did
so,
yours in 3 days.
yeah, but mine wasn't as beautifully engineered as his was. The only difference was mine worked.
No.
Sometimes the simple answer is the better
Simple,
one.
simple is best.
Well,
Simple is always
I
best.
have to say, one of the chapters in my book is I wrote this book to try and inspire other people to follow their dreams to be all they could be, but I make sure that there isn't any chapter that's longer than 3 paragraphs because I don't want to bore anybody, right? And so, but one of them says, you know, let simplicity be the essence of your genius, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What you need to do is look at something and then whittle it down and bring it down to the simplest level, especially when you're making movies. Because when something breaks, they haven't got the time to wait for you to figure out what component it is that doesn't work and how long it's going to take for you to fix it and whether you've got to strip it all down again. You don't want something as complicated as a BMW. You want something as simple as will do the job, as unlikely to break down as possible.
Kiss. Keep it simple, stupid. Yeah, it's, you know, to be honest, it's amazing that they got by with only 4 because we were talking to our first interview was with Ted Haynes, who is a fabricator and he makes costumes and lots of different things. And he had done the Tick costume for the Tick TV show, and they had like a dozen of those, just the costume. And I was like, you know, it's not easy to make so many of those things, but you know, you have to have an extra one on scene in case something breaks, and then you have to be there to watch over it, in case it needs fixing. Right. It's a hands-on job.
I think now, though, I've interviewed quite a lot of people recently, making The Mandalorian and making, you know, other Marvel movies, etc. They really do break it down to elements that are much smaller. You know, someone says, "Oh, you made that costume." Say, "Well, actually, I made 8 pairs of pants."
No, right. Yeah.
Right. You are the pant maker, right? And someone else is making the armor and someone else is making something else. They break it down into lots of small pieces now. Whereas, you know, in the day when we were doing it, you conceived it up here, you built it with these, you did the foam work, you did the stuff, you assembled it.
You painted it.
In movies like Life Force, I filmed it as well, right? So
wow.
It was a different way of doing stuff, and I think much more satisfying than to be able to say I'm the guy who made Kylo Ren's pants.
Well, Nick, I mean, that's why we wanted you on the show, of course, is because you are that Renaissance man. You are you're thinking as a fabricator, as a tailor, as an actor. You know,
as
all
a
the physiology,
as a makeup artist,
as a makeup,
and that's what we focus on here. And as a matter of fact, we wanted to ask you specifically, what are some of the things that you're working on right now? I mean, you have your Starnet, right? You also have your museum there in St. Martin's. And you have a lot of stuff, and you, like you said, you interviewed a lot of guys. I know you know Tom.
Tom Spooner.
Yeah. I mean, you talk to a lot of folks, but you bring together this community, and you want to continue to do that. And we want to introduce people to that community so that they can come in and listen to those interviews, and
well,
if they get the chance to go down to the Caribbean.
You know, I wasn't doing Starnet events until COVID shut everything down. Basically, I have a museum in the Caribbean where people come and see me and talk about movies. It's the only place in the world where someone can access a Star Wars personality without paying to get into a convention. And so, you know, people will come into the museum, and it's like $12 to go through the museum, and we've got all kinds of stuff from Men in Black and and Harry and the Hendersons, and of course Star Wars and Highlander and Life Force and other movies that I worked on. And at the end, you know, I'm sitting there working at my computer, and I talk to everybody, and I you know, I'm the host, and that's been hugely popular. We're recommended on every major cruise line as a place that they should go to, and TripAdvisor has put us in their Hall of Fame and just gave us a what was the word? Traveler's Choice Award, Best of the Best 2020, which is a kind of weird thing to give us when there's no tourists here. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Take it.
So
it's good.
that has been keeping me pretty busy. Well, suddenly, you know, here we are in a small Caribbean island, which has probably no more than 70,000 people. So it's smaller than a small town. It doesn't have enough local business to keep anything going. And so the main shopping drag is all about buying stuff duty free, because there's no duty in St. Martin, no import duty at all. And so it's built itself around duty-free shopping and whatever. So, you know, the main drag is 300 shops, of which 200 are jewelry stores, and one is the Yoda Guy movie exhibit. But suddenly, when the ships stopped coming, one day on the 12th of March, the economy just stops dead. That's it. Yeah. I think we've taken $400 since March the 12th. You know, paying the rent and doing those other things is, it's just a formula for going broke. Right now, I believe about 110 of the 300 businesses in Front Street have gone belly up. And we don't know when the ships are going to come back. So there might be nobody left here by the time the ships do come back in. And I'm concerned too about whether or not the ships will let their passengers roam freely around a location and then get back on the ship to infect other people. I know that MSC in Europe only let their people go on organized tours, and when a couple wandered off, they wouldn't let them get back on the ship. So if they do that, then none of these stores are going to get any business at all, even when the ships come back. So it's a scary time. I got a lot of followers on YouTube and also on Facebook. I've got multiple pages on Facebook, so if you put them all together, there's probably I don't know, 15,000 there. Even though I don't think any groups got more than 3,000, but YouTube, I've got 16,000 people there. And so, you know, I put out the fact that we were going to fold up if we couldn't figure out some way of doing it. And I had a bunch of people who joined me on Patreon. We have a patreon.com/FYSF, which is the Folly Star Foundation, which is my foundation.
We'll put links to that in the
people
description.
Subscribe to that,
yeah.
and started, you know, giving us a couple of $1,000s a month, which has helped us get through. And then I started to do sales of some of our relic items online to make up the difference to pay the bills. And we cut all our overheads down, but we managed to get through the first 5 months of it. And we're hoping that we'll get through the next 5 months of it. But Starnet events was something that I started to thank those people who were supporting us. To say, well, you know what, I'm going to reach out to my friends and to my colleagues and give you 4 hours of entertainment of people that you would never normally be able to get access to.
I think James and I were part of those first couple.
Yeah.
And they were brilliant. They were really great. So
yeah, I really recommend to folks, if you if you get the chance, check out. We're going to put links to all this
Yeah,
in the
sure.
description. And then if everybody who's listening wants to go and you want to join this, go on the Facebook page. It has links to it, and it also has, scheduling and updates and everything. I know Tom and a bunch of other guys guest on there, and they talk, and it's really, really educational. I mean, if you don't know anything about it, or if you want to know something about it, man, that's the place to go.
Well, it's a great combination. Go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say the Folly of Star Foundation is all about encouraging people to follow their dreams and be creative rather than sitting around playing games all the time. I'm sorry, guys, for playing games, but that's how I feel about it. And so I try to encourage people to believe. Let's explain to them a little something about how something was made, so they can experiment with it and they can develop it and they can, get into it. So I also embrace the cosplay community because a lot of those people are the next generation of creative people, and a number of the people who are mainstays for Starnet events are people who started out in cosplay and now work for Disney or whoever else who've made that evolution. And
I was getting ready to say you're talking to some.
You're talking to two of them, yeah.
Yeah, right.
But Nick, I really appreciated that you have veterans from yourself included, but you have veterans, but then you have the cosplay community who are so passionate about building and learning other skills. And I mean, that's our podcast in a nutshell, is we want to talk to the people who are searching for that next skill so that they can combine them. You've got these cosplayers who are doing foam work, leather, electronics, mechanisms, just so that they can get that almost impossible experience. So that's really cool. So yeah, I can't recommend it enough. It was really great.
But there's also a lot of new techniques there. So every now and then I'm learning something too. One of the girls that's a mainstay with me is Cynthia Kirkland, who is a costumer for Disneyland. Mm-hmm. And for Disney Cruise Lines, making the costumes for the stormtroopers to go take over the ship or whatever else. And so I'm seeing how she's using 3D printing and various other things to get around certain elements. And I was talking to someone else too about being even possibly producing 3D printed molds to make physical non-3D items. So there's a lot of new ideas that can float around. Another thing in my book, I say you should never stop learning, because you may think you're a master of your craft, but you can't stay ahead of the crowd if you don't keep moving forward.
Right. Agreed 100%. Yeah.
That's very true. Do you have a copy of your book around, if you want to hold one up to show on camera? Or we can, always. I like that chair.
I'm back, all right.
Okay. Do you sell that on Amazon or anything?
It's on Amazon. It's in Barnes and Noble. Yeah. I think if you go to Barnes and Noble store, they may have to order it for you, because I don't think they've got it in every Barnes and Noble bookshop. Right. But you can get it from online just by ordering it through Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
Or do not. There is no try.
Yeah, exactly. It's the do or do not outlook. I couldn't resist, borrowing that. And as I say on the back, it's a Jedi's guide to self-empowerment.
Yeah, for everybody who's Derek, you were going to say, for everybody who's listening, the book's called The Do or Do Not Outlook.
It's fantastic. Yeah. It's worth because it's your insights too, and I think that's the fun of it.
It's really just about a particular attitude. It's a state of mind, right?
Yep.
We are the first thing in the book, the first paragraph says,
I don't believe it. That is why you fail.
no, it points out the fact. I'm just trying to find page number 1, you know, it's there, right? And it says, you know, you can't live an exceptional life by being normal. Let's get used to that. First of all, people just don't get that. We live in a world where everybody thinks that if 1 million people think it's good, then that's the standard that it needs to be. You have to understand, Einstein, there weren't 1 million people that were going to agree with Einstein about the principles of relativity. You know, encyclopedias are not written by normal people, by average people. They're written by experts. The strange guy sitting in the corner, the weird one that nobody likes, he's the one that's going to change the world, not the leader of the football team.
I'm going to go back and tell everybody I went to high school with that, because they were all always making fun of me.
Yeah, well, that's it. Really, that is it. And so, and I found I was invited to go talk at autism conventions because of the book, because a lot of the things that I talk about there are about self-value and about believing in yourself and believing you can achieve something. Some at conventions, when I'm doing talks about making the creatures for Mos Eisley and how Yoda was built, I also do one about believing in yourself and following your dreams. And you can see those people, they are there, but they have been bamboozled at school, and they've been bamboozled by their families to believe, but you'll never make any money at that. Don't take a risk, right? It's a risk not to be normal.
Yes.
Well, if you don't take the risk, you're never gonna be on a show like this, because you stuck your neck out and built a backup Yoda in 3 days. I could have said, oh no, I couldn't possibly build that, and not stuck my neck out. If I hadn't, and when I went for it, I didn't know how I was going to build it. I just knew I had to do it in the time.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with failing in that either, because that's a good way to learn.
And that's another chapter in the book. It says setbacks are okay, because you haven't failed until you've given up.
Well, and I think that idea that, you know, you don't say no. I built my career on people will say, well, you're going to write this episode. And I say, okay. Then I come home and I, you know, go to my wife and say, how am I going to do that? I don't know, you know.
And she writes it. And you put
yes,
your name
of course. I mean, you know, she's the brilliant one.
But that's okay. And that's the bottom line. If you don't grasp the opportunity, you don't know where your life would have led you.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, for all three of us, I know that that's been sort of the launching point. Is we went where it was scary.
Yep. To go boldly where no man has gone before.
My dad.
Am I quoting the wrong series?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the other.
Okay, I'll forgive you.
Yeah. My dad sat me down, you know, in a caring way, and says, "What are you doing? You're going to California to be what? An actor, an artist?" And I said, "Well, Dad, it's kind of both." He goes, "Like that's better."
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But then when I came out with my first movie, he said, I went to the theater by myself and I'm sitting there with a bunch of kids but I watched your movie, you know, and it was sort of a vote of confidence, you know.
Yeah. Ted said, he said his dad was like, I don't understand what's going on. And then he came out and he visited him on set and he's like, Arnold Schwarzenegger knows your name.
Yeah.
At some point the thing is we often look for recognition from those that we consider important, whether that's our parents or whoever. And to seek the recognition of somebody else, I think is sometimes a mistake, not necessarily so, but you have to work towards a goal. And if you are happy with your work, then push yourself on and forward and do something new and do something more. But that whole attitude of thinking that you're going to fail, or, I mean, like they said in Star Wars when Luke says, you know, I don't believe it. And then Yoda's like, that's why you failed.
That's why you failed.
It
Exactly.
really is.
That's why you failed,
yeah.
Yeah.
That is.
And actually, I know I'm harping back on something we talked about earlier, but I believe that is why those quotes and those scenes are why Empire Strikes Back is the best of all those movies.
Oh,
It gets
yeah.
into philosophy, and it gets into the driving force. They wanted to discover what is this force that everyone's talking about, and I think that without getting much credit for it, I think Gary Kurtz was probably partly involved in that, since he was the spiritual one of that team.
Mm.
But Lawrence Kasdan, wrote a brilliant script, and it had so many elements within it, other than people running around shooting each other with laser guns. We've seen so many movies since that are one action sequence after another. Does that really make a movie that we all remember for 40 years? Casablanca, people still talk about it, and the airplane didn't even take off.
Right, never. Nope. It was a cardboard cutout.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, coming back, Nick, to what you said, the bravery, I think, even Irving Kershner, the whole team. Think about that one scene where Yoda describes the Force to Luke. It's one shot, and the subtlety of the acting, he carries it. He just eats up the scenery. You don't question it. You just completely vested because of the culmination. Such a beautiful. I was watching it recently with the kids, and it's still chill worthy. It
really is. I mean, he reaches over and pinches him. He's like, it surrounds us, it binds us. And the thing is you look at the philosophy of it. That's one thing, but man, does that really push forward the character development? And like Derek was saying, that acting, it really makes it real. And suddenly, not only do you have this story, Kasdan's story is really good, but he brings the fact that it's a puppet brings forth this tangibility and this realism to what he's saying. And like, I love that little pinch, and you see Luke's arm get pinched. And I mean, that's hard to do in CG. You can do it, obviously, but it's hard to make it real like that. And I remember seeing that. I was, how old were we when Empire came out? It was, Star Wars was my first movie.
79? Was it 79?
Empire, no, the first movie came
77.
77.
It was 80. It was 1980.
1980.
Yeah, 80 was Empire Strikes Back. And I remember seeing that thinking, that's not Kermit the Frog. That's not a Muppet. Is that real? Is he a living thing? My mom was just like, no. You couldn't get it out of my head.
Listen, you say that. I have these people even today that come into the museum and think that Yoda was a little guy in a prosthetic makeup.
Right.
Yeah. That you've done a fantastic job, not just of your original work, but also keeping it alive and introducing people to the world. And we can see your museum behind you here if people are watching on YouTube.
Yes, there's a little bit of it.
Yeah, it's really cool. And we want to show.
We got aliens over in the corner there.
Nice.
Oh my goodness gracious.
That's fantastic.
You're going to scare the pants off the little kids there.
Well, actually, I built that one out of silicon because I wanted it to be the last thing that people saw. And I wanted that when they got within 3 feet of it, it just eased forward and breezed on them a bit.
Nice.
Nothing too grand, just a little.
That's mean.
I never got to finish it, but I'll get to it sometime in the next 20, 30 years.
Whose face cast is that behind you?
Let me see.
I see the Maltese Falcon.
That is Bogey.
Oh, that's great.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
We have about 6 decades of life casts. In fact, we even have the life cast of Abraham Lincoln from 3 months before he was assassinated.
Wow.
I would love to get my hands on that.
Yeah.
Have you seen? Do you know who the most advanced animatronic is right now? Like the most advanced animatronic on, I think, in the world right now is a animatronic of Abe Lincoln.
I've seen that. That guy
Yeah.
is amazing.
That's
It's big though.
nuts.
It's
huge.
oversized. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really big.
Yeah.
Is this a
insane.
Disney?
It's
No.
not. It's not.
No.
But this guy works for all the different companies. We could probably send you the link. It's really.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
really
most
nice.
of those things that Disney do, what you're seeing is the tip of the iceberg, because it's all everything is under the floor rather than freestanding.
Right,
Well, he
right.
does a lot of
The,
stuff for the parks, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things, there's a big difference between movie animatronics and theme park animatronics, because the theme park animatronics got to run and run and run and run and run and run and run every day, and the limitations that you have to put in to make that happen very often minimize the nicety of some of those movements.
I wanted to ask something. I want your opinion on this. There are some people now who are looking at making robots and animatronics using and some prosthetics and things like that, using bladders and things that actually, they're not mechanical in the machine sense. It's more of an organic movement, and it of course translates a lot smoother, but it's
Yeah,
also
I
fewer
used
things
a
to
lot of
break.
bladders. I used a lot of bladders in different movies.
They're trying to make it like the machine, instead of a gear moving and turning something, they want to make things that like spring coil
It's almost
connections.
pneumatic.
Yeah, it's well, yeah, it's sort of, yeah.
Here's the one of the issues. Animatronics as a name came about, applied to movies, because of union disagreements that were taking place on Empire Strikes Back.
Really?
We were makeup artists. We were upsetting the sculptors because we were sculpting characters. And we were upsetting the plasterers because we were making molds for foam latex. And we were upsetting the props department because we were making puppets, and we were upsetting the special effects department because we were building mechanisms. And they said, because the line producer already had a deal to go on to Dark Crystal and wanted to bring a lot of the puppeteers in, the makers from who were non-union entirely, said, let's have a new branch and call it animatronics. And animatronics does all of this stuff. So animatronics was taken from audio animatronics as a word from Disney. But really, what we were building would have been much better described as soft mechanics. And the sense of biological movements. People have gotten so carried away now. Someone says, I'm an animatronic engineer, and everything they build is working off of servos and push rods and various mechanical principles that have absolutely nothing to do with anything that's biological. And so what we were building was largely stuff that was quite different. Even now, I build give, I'm going to use the word give, into my mechanisms, which an engineer is never, ever, ever going to do. An engineer takes out all the give so that when he presses something, it's direct and it moves. I put flex into that, which is what they're doing by putting in bladders or springs into the mechanism, is deliberately to give it the sort of soft flexibility that a muscle has. A muscle accelerates to maximum speed and slows down. It doesn't move like a servo that goes tick, 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 at the same speed from one end to the other end. Right. It doesn't have a rigid thing that moves. I see animatronics now that people put on YouTube, and look, isn't this great? I made this, and it's got eyes that go click, 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 click. Right? That's because, it's easier to flick the button on the top of the radio control unit that just jumps from A to Z instead of going through it in a different way. And I really think that people are focusing on the tronics instead of on the anima.
Anima.
And
Yeah,
we
exactly.
honestly need to think more about the biology of a movement.
I mean, I
Right.
think that brings to mind R2D2. A lot of people don't realize, I think they do now, but Kenny Baker was in that thing and giving it that human quality, you know, the way he made it rock, the way he was turning the dome a lot of times by hand.
Yeah, and also things like you got to plug into something, getting a radio controlled thing to line up and plug in, even just to get a radio controlled one to walk down you're in the desert, right? Yeah, you are. You're in the desert. You're going to get a robot to run around on sand. Oh no, that's not quite going to work, is it? Well, I tell you what, let's get some 8x4s and we'll put them on the ground and we'll just bring the camera up a bit so you can't see his feet, and we'll get the robot to run down there. You ever tried to get a radio controlled item to run evenly in the middle of a 4-foot channel back in?
I can't get it to run on my floor.
Days, they ended up having another version which was just a hollow shell that they pulled on nylon wires, right? Because they could pull it in a straight line down that there are different things that you need to do different shots, and sometimes if it's simple and it works and it gets the shot quicker, why make it more complicated?
There's a trend here in Japan for several commercials that I worked on not too long ago. They use hydraulic mechanisms to do the movements of things. Now there are some animals that do that. Like if you're going to be doing a bird beak, that actually works rather like that. And a bird's head when it goes back and forth. Yeah, I can see that. But we had to. I mean, I know there's always your after recording, your ADR. But we had to do everything again because of the hydraulic sounds that would go on while you're filming. It was like, and I'm blowing out the microphone as I do that. I'll have to edit that out later. But I mean, that was so loud that we had to wear like headphones if you're like ear protection if you're standing next to the machine, because it would pop, 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 and it would just fire off. And it looked so unnatural. And I was so angry. And of course, everything's part of everybody's got contracts.
That's why I often say, get any way you can put a puppeteer in instead of a mechanism. Put the damn puppeteer in. You get so much more movement and believability out of lips that just do that. Then you never get out of cables and wires and servos, right? You get just that little change of expression, that little subtle movement. If you can, always go back to a puppeteer's arm, because that arm is going to accelerate to a maximum speed and slow down. That's one of the reasons why, and I had problems with cinematographers over this, why I pushed to shoot my own sequences. And I think my best work is in a not so great movie, which I did a thing about last weekend, which was Life Force, where I got to literally shoot all of my own animatronic sequences. And it was very cost effective too, because, when I started doing storyboards, I'm the makeup artist, the cinematographer's going, what is this makeup artist guy doing? Is he going he's going to shoot second, he's going to tell the cameraman to turn the camera over? That's mindset that they couldn't really, get a handle on. That was one part of the problems that I had on Highlander that ended up with me not shooting the second unit. But I would sit down with the director and talk about what the scene was and how we saw it. I would explain to him why I felt certain sequences were too repetitive and why it cost just as much to do the same thing 5 times The fifth time, it costs just as much as the first time, but people have already seen it. And I would try to redesign things. If I did a storyboard and you only saw one side of the face, maybe for speed, I'm only going to paint one side of the face. You know, I would deliver exactly what was on the storyboards, and it would be much cheaper, but it would also mean that I knew what I was designing something for, because I was going to
Right.
film it.
Right. You have to do, I mean, there's a big difference between, I worked in the parks and done both. And when you're doing a movie, you do what you need to do to get what's in the shot,
Yes.
in camera. And sometimes you use materials that you have lying around to get it done. But there is an amount of creativity and thinking outside the box that's necessary to do that. And some people, they just don't have that. And so, you know, you have to let somebody do that. I will tell you this, I always enjoyed Life Force because I saw it when I was just growing up, and I watched it because of that very thing, that it had those special effects that I really looked forward to. I watched it when I was a little too young, so it was very how should I say, educational for me. My father saw he's like, "What are you watching?" It's like, yeah, because, you know, it's got some scenes that I don't think 9-year-olds should be watching.
Well, I don't know. I mean, 9-year-olds get to be 12-year-olds, and
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was an educational movie for me. Yeah.
We grew up in that era of these movies from the 70s going into the 80s, and I mean, such pivotal films. I mean, obviously the Star Wars franchises, but we also had things like Poltergeist and American Werewolf in London and things like that sort of changed our view of,
yes, that was great,
what was possible.
I American Werewolf in London particularly was a movie changing movie. There are
running that
certain
backwards.
that, if people looking at them now, they don't necessarily recognize just how outside the box a particular movie was at a particular time, because within a few years there was a bunch of other people that were copying those, and if you don't know which one was the first one there, then you had to live through it to experience.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, I loved watching that reverse film, you know, of the hair being pulled through, and then you see it and it's growing out. I was like, how did they do that?
Right.
That stuff, yeah, it really did. It was inspirational. It was game changing for me, especially to say, you know, I want to learn how to do that kind of thing. But Star Wars was something that took Akira Kurosawa. It took, you know, it was the Hidden Fortress. It took Flash Gordon. It took so much stuff from every different thing. And then you have the brilliance of George's writing. And then you have especially Lawrence Kasdan's script for Empire Strikes Back, which is my own personal favorite of all Star Wars. It's got that, and it's got that cliffhanger at the end. You know, it was like an old, what did we call those? You know, you'd watch the old
serial. Saturday morning.
The serials, yeah.
They were 15-minute serials that you watched every week.
Yeah, the Lone Ranger.
Morning at the cinema, because you didn't have, in those days, there weren't televisions that people sat down and watched.
Right.
I remember going to Saturday morning pictures before my grandmother came along with a black and white TV. So,
wow. we got an earthquake. We're having an earthquake.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Okay. Everybody okay? I don't see anything shaking.
No, but my lamp over here is shaking, and
oh wow,
I'm really dizzy. Ooh. You guys keep talking for a second. I'm gonna go see if everybody's all right on my end.
Okay.
Yeah. For me, Nick, it was one of those things. I started sculpting the head as much as I could 1-to-1. I'm guessing on sizes and things like that, but I based it on this size. I know this distance to this distance, and so I based it off of that, and then I sculpted it out of monster clay from screen.
Right.
You know, from whatever I could find. Specifically Empire, though. You know, I kept.
Yeah, well, me
back.
too. For me, in rebuilding Yoda, I wanted to rebuild the Empire Strikes Back Yoda, which was the kindly, wise Yoda. That was the one that I wanted to bring back. I didn't want to bring back the guy who ran around with a lightsaber and hit
Nope.
people.
Mm-mm.
I never understood that. He says, you know, at some point somebody's like, "You don't have a lightsaber." He's like, "Do I need one?" And
yeah,
then
exactly.
and then he's like jumping around, like, what happened to the cane and all that stuff? Come on.
I have to say there are a few holes in the Star Wars theory.
No.
You know, after all,
No.
if you can reach out with your hand and zap someone with lightning, what the hell do you need a lightsaber for, right? But hey,
Yeah.
Well,
I wanted that moment. I digress, but I wanted that moment when, you know, Darth. Of course, it wasn't all conceived as they want you to believe, but you want that moment where Darth Vader sees 3PO and says,
hey, 3PO.
Is that? Wait a minute. Is that you, Master? You know. And
Yeah, that would be fun.
that'd be a
Well, he
weird
had his
moment.
memory wiped a couple times,
Sure.
but
yeah.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Ben,
I was saying to Nick, I was like, I took this on. You know, I posted pictures of it, and people came out of the woodwork. You can't do that. You can't make that. And I said, I'm making it for me. It's how I get inside your head. It's how I get inside of
Who said you can't make it?
all kinds of people. That's illegal. You can't make that. And I said, what are you talking about? This is my fan-made
Sell that.
homage.
You
I'm
can't
not
sell
selling it.
that, but there's nothing
No.
to say you can't sculpt it.
Right, exactly.
Put it in your living room.
So, but I began to appreciate the genius that was Stewart's design as I got into the minutia of, exactly like you said, the history that is sculpted in that face.
there's a lot to be said. Uncle George always encouraged the fans, which was really good because
From the start.
yeah, from the start. I mean, that fandom is really what pushes a lot of Star Wars because it's
the
that old
501st,
real stuff.
you know?
Yeah. Oh,
The whole
my
501st
goodness gracious,
and
yeah.
But
I don't think Disney understands that, to be honest.
No,
I'm
no, they
sorry. I'm
Well,
sorry to.
someone told me that they kind of abandoned the Star Wars fan clubs. I mean, they actually don't. Like at one point, I was saying, "Oh, there's no Star Wars fan club in Puerto Rico," for example. You know, and I was talking to someone about a developer about some stuff down by the port, you know, and I was saying, well, why don't we start the Puerto Rican Star Wars fan club? That gives us an excuse to put an X-wing on the roof, you know, and
Do you need an excuse?
yeah, well, you know, we don't want Disney to come down and say, why have you got an X-wing next to a cruise?
Right.
You know, so, you know, but I understood that although there are still some official Star Wars fan clubs, that they you know, they stopped, you know, banter tracks and you know, all of those things in favor of people just being a member of StarWars.com.
Well, there's also the thing that now they have Galaxy's Edge in the parks, right? And you used to be able to go into the parks dressed as a character.
Right.
And Halloween here, we don't have Galaxy's Edge here in Tokyo. And so you can still go into the parks dressed, you know, as a character. As a matter of fact, Disney has I've gone in as Obi-Wan Kenobi a couple of times. They redid their Star Tours. And so I went in and, you know, posed as Obi-Wan Kenobi for, you know, next to Mickey for a couple of times. But you used to be able to go in dressed up in costume. And I don't think they allow you to do that now because people might get confused. You know, are you staff? Are you a character from Galaxy's Edge?
If you are a visitor who runs around and accidentally pokes somebody's eye out with the end of your lightsaber, they are fearful that someone will then sue the park, saying one of their employees poked his eye out with a lightsaber. And one of the strange things, I mean, when you go to the Star Wars celebrations, Star Wars Celebrations is really all about the cosplayers, all these people who dress up in costume and go out and have fun taking photographs in front of backdrops and various other things. I don't think those people necessarily would get, they want to go to Galaxy's Edge and wander around in their costumes.
Yeah,
That's the whole nature of what it is. And I did wonder, what the future of Celebration was going to be if every day of the year you could go to Galaxy's Edge instead of waiting for 2 years to go to Celebration. Will it still have the same impact? Will it still have the same?
Well, the draw of Celebration and Comic-Con that blew it up is the chance to meet people like yourself that we wouldn't get to meet otherwise.
Right.
You can go to conventions and meet the actors, sure, or you could see them, but to get the people behind the scenes and the people who really sort of built that universe, I think that's amazing.
To be honest, Disney stopped kind of really promoting that. What you said, one of the two of you, I think it was you, about them promoting the characters rather than the project.
Right.
They don't really want to promote any of the people who made any of the stuff. They don't want to connect with that. This Yoda that I was working on, I had one of the licensees who talked about wanting to take the work that I'd done and turn it into the ultimate Yoda replica at like $10,000 a pop, for something that was literally 100% accurate. And I said, well, that's all well and good, but you're not going to be able to pay me for the 5 years work that I put into it. So
they're not going to be willing to anyway.
Right. What I want is publicity out of it, so that more people get to know me and what I did and how I did it, and I'll get my income in a broader sense. And Disney wouldn't allow it.
Well, I don't know, Derek, if it was like this for you. When I turned in my first portfolio for Disney, one of the things was you had to sign off basically in blood that anything in your portfolio was then their property.
Yeah.
And I'm going to refrain from saying some of the things that I really want to say now. But when I turned in my first portfolio, I seem to remember thinking, there's some stuff in here that I'm keeping in my portfolio that had never been published outside, but they do that for a reason, right? When you send in your stuff to Disney, it's the Disney image. And if it becomes personal for each artist, it diminishes the whole, which is what actually drives the machine forward. And if you want to be part of that machine, then that's what you're signing on to, is that you're getting on that train with that engine. And it's because if you're getting on, that was the thing with Don Bluth. Do you remember Don Bluth?
Oh, yeah.
Nick, I'm not sure if he made a great movie called All Dogs Go to Heaven. And he had originally been one of the other animators from Disney. And he was like, I want to go out on my own. And he did a great job going out on his own, but it didn't last. Don Bluth Animation is, I don't know if anybody knows who it is now.
Apparently he's making a comeback.
That would be great. I'd love to see it but it's the same thing with Miyazaki Hayao son. He wanted to make a movie that was like Ghibli, but not Ghibli. And, it's good. It's really, really good. But it just doesn't have the engine behind it to drive it forward.
Exactly. Nothing. You can make you can write the best book or paint the greatest painting or make the best movie. If you don't have distribution, then whoever's got the distribution has got you by the short and curlies, and that's the that's the end of it, right? Yeah. I think that's one of the areas where things are evolving. I know that through streaming, we are, bypassing cinemas and giving the opportunity for the movie distributors to make twice the profit by or half their prices by not having to share it with the movie cinemas.
The theaters.
But I think that there's also a huge opportunity there for the millions of people who are turned out from universities and never have the opportunity to actually do the job because there aren't enough jobs for all the people that they've trained in university to do most of this stuff, because universities are in the business of selling courses, not in the business of finding people jobs.
Right.
And so consequently, most people are now watching their movies and their other stuff on this or on a tablet. And so all of those people who are being trained to animate and to do various other things are perfectly capable of sitting with their Apple computer or whatever else and making their own programs. All they need is the distribution. So whoever it is that creates a independent Netflix for independent makers will allow all of those people who made something on their Apple computer an outlet to be able to bypass the distributors.
I think that's why YouTube is such a big deal nowadays.
Yeah, but YouTube, they don't really get any money out of making it. They get some kudos and they make money out of having lots of people following their, you know, what they make.
It's the advertising.
What you want is something where, you know, every time someone watches your show, you get 25 cents.
Right.
And at that point, if enough people have subscribed to Netflix or whatever it is, then you as an independent maker can make your movie in 4K or whatever you want to make it in, and not have to worry about being taken to task or I don't want to say but being manipulated by the distributors who control whether or not your stuff ever gets seen. The internet is an open area at this moment in time. Who knows what rules and regulations are going to get put on it? They're going to restrict things.
Yeah, we're at a turning point right now, I think, in history where there's a platform, and if there's not a platform, there's the opportunity for making one. But there is a really interesting talk on Joe Rogan about how certain tech companies bypass the normal moral journey that CEOs go through to become, when they become powerful enough, they kind of realize these are the hoops I need to jump through. And then some tech companies suddenly just get thrust into the limelight and they're like, well, how do we do this? What do we do? And there are questions that come about, you know, morally, philosophically, theologically, socially, that you need to really deal with. On the other hand, your common everyday maker, people who just want to sit down and make some art, now really have an opportunity to make something, get it out there. And it may not be seen by millions. If it's good, people will share it. Just kuchikomi, how do you say that in English? A word of mouth. Mm-hmm. You just have that kind of word of mouth progression. This guy's great. This guy's stuff is great. And you share it with somebody else, because it's a very...
yeah, that's all well and good, but you know, the bottom line is that the guy ends up being a bus driver because he can't make any money out of his great movies. Right. You know, for him to be able to produce what he's capable of producing, he has to be able to pay the bills while he's doing it. And so you have to have some way that is going to bring someone a moderate return for what it is that they, you know, what it is that they're producing. It doesn't have to be enormous. If it's small, so if it's really small, but 20 million people subscribe, then suddenly, you know, the guy has made a huge success out of his heart and out of his labor. And honestly, I would honestly question, when you start talking about CEOs in big companies, I would honestly question some of the moral judgment of some of those
Oh
people.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah, certainly,
right?
certainly. Well, power corrupts.
There's a sort of a median that I've experienced because I came to California as an animator. I was an actor and an artist combined, and then that job sort of dried up. They sent it all overseas. So then I started doing storyboarding and directing and things like that. Because in my mind, you couldn't be an animator. Well, a friend of mine, Sergio Pablo, said, no, I'm not giving up. I'm going to continue animating. And so he animated a trailer, a short, got a crowdfunding, put things on YouTube and on Facebook, Instagram, and then got picked up by Netflix. So he showed them the potentiality of what this project could be, you know, what his vision was. And now it's that movie Klaus, however you
Yeah,
say it.
the Santa Claus movie where
With
they,
the postman, yeah.
yeah, and it's a great movie. As a matter of fact, it's the way they shade that 2D animation is absolutely phenomenal.
And
It's
it was
fantastic.
because Netflix saw the germ of the idea. I mean, he
Right.
basically connected the dots for them, and then they said, "Yes, let's make that."
Yeah.
You know, that's it's not an easy road, but it's a potential. You know,
It's
Yeah, the
sure.
potential's out there.
because you know it used to be, I've got a great idea, and then you take all your stuff and then you pitch it to the studio, and the studio goes, "No," or they go, "Yes, but we're going to change everything about it."
Yeah,
Yeah.
another thing that's in my book, I talk about. I say that the two, being an actor and being a screenwriter, are exercises in rejection. They, you know, this is where every actor who goes for a job is competing with at least 100 other actors. So the odds are always 100 to 1 against him getting the part.
Yep.
And, you know, and basically you have to be very thick-skinned. As a writer, Dan O'Bannon didn't come up with all those great ideas for all the movies that he made. He became a success with one movie, and then people said, well, we have this synopsis, we need someone to turn it into a script, and Dan O'Bannon writes that kind of stuff. And so Dan is developing someone else's idea. If you're a great writer with great ideas, taking it to the studio, if it isn't something that they think they would be interested in, they're not even going to read it, right? And if it is something they're interested in, they might not read it because they don't want you to think that they stole your ideas if what's in yours is similar to what's in theirs.
I've been in pitch meetings with Disney. I've been in pitch meetings with them, and you know, how much can I say on the podcast? But it's well known that they have an agenda, right?
You're all beeped out there.
They have an agenda. They have an idea. They have a game plan and an arc that they're following. So in that moment, when you know, we did it typical Hollywood. My wife and I went to lunch with them, and they said, "Go pitch." And we're in the middle of a restaurant. And so I said, okay, I want to do this kind of a show. They said, no, we don't want anything educational right now. We want a quick hit of adrenaline. We want a sugar shock. We want them to come back for more. No continuity. But that could change in a month.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, there's an old saying, we'll know it when we see it. As a matter of fact, Mike Rowe on How I Heard It has a really great story recently called "We'll Know It When We See It," and it's about. Well, I won't tell you how it's. Go listen to it, but this little boy gets the job because of his attitude. It's kind of the same story as Harrison Ford. He walked in and he was just like, you know, I could take this or not. I got a job as a carpenter. I don't really need this job. Right. And they're like, that's exactly the guy we're looking for. And he got it because that happened to be the kind of character they were looking for. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that happens in the movie for Indiana Jones and for Han Solo come about just because that's Harrison Ford's attitude. You know, it's like he feels sick one day, so he shoots the swordsman instead of fighting him. Yeah. And, you know, he's like, you know, she says, I love you. And he says, I love you too. I'd never say that. It's like, I know. And they stick that in the movie. And, it comes out of the character, the personality. And sometimes the things that we make as artists just get made and just become big or whatever because other people connect to it so well. That's exactly what they were looking for. And they didn't know it until they saw it.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think sharing the very deep part of you that you don't usually want to show to other people is what kind of creates that. And everybody else kind of goes, I'm not alone in that thought, or that's not just me. Wow, that's really great. Sorry, I didn't go off on a tangent there. Nick, I wanted to ask you something. Your museum there, and I know a lot of people are not going to be able to get off the boat, even if the ships start cruising. Would you be interested in doing like a virtual tour, just temporarily? Say, go through a virtual tour, like a 3D version of your museum, and then on that Starnet thing, saying if anybody wants to come see the museum, it's you get like a little Patreon thing, $1 or whatever, and then boop, you get a link to that, like a ticket,
Yeah, I
virtual
had
tour.
actually thought about doing like a guided tour of
Mm,
the museum, because a lot of the stuff, it's not really about the items. It's about the stories that take
Yeah.
place
Yeah.
behind the items. That's the very nature of what we got here. We can't compete with the Smithsonian for the stuff that they've got in there, or Lucasfilm for all of the props they've got. But when you go and you see the Wampa, which Graham Freeborn and I basically built the body of, and Stu built the head, it says it's a Wampa. It's from Empire Strikes Back. That's all they know about it.
Yeah. There's no story
Right?
behind it.
You know,
Yeah.
I tell the story about how we needed wampa fur, and we rushed down the high street and bought 8 goatskin rugs, and came back and slapped them all together. And it's those inside stories that make it what it is. And so that's really what I try to do in the museum. The museum is all hologram and DVD driven. So it's not like going to a normal museum. It's more like going to a haunted house.
That's cool.
that's great. Yeah, especially with the alien at the very end that breathes on you.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Nick, we don't want to keep you too long. I really want to thank you.
Oh, you're
Derek,
very welcome.
yeah, we got to do this again. To be honest, the Starnet, I'm gonna have to. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning for me.
Okay.
Usually,
Yeah,
I'm gonna
but
have
what
to.
we do with Starnet is we run it on a Sunday at usually about 11 o'clock, but it stays there for people. Anyone who's subscribed and has access into that group can
Right.
watch it at any time for over 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, so
And
I'll a lot of times go back later, but I don't get the chat and the
yeah, right.
live interaction. That's
Yes.
really fun. It's really fun because Derek and I would like go back and forth on the chat, be like, "What's up, man?" Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to kind of be in there, and you can talk to some of the other folks that are on that. And it's that community is really great, and I want to suggest to anybody listening that you guys go check that out. The link will be in the description. Uh, there's so much stuff to see, and
I mean, I feel
hear.
you hit on the virtual con before anybody else.
Yes,
I really
I
do.
don't know about that. I think a lot of people came up with it along the way. To be honest, everyone started talking about a virtual con. There's no comparison between what you can do, through a medium like Zoom or anything similar to it. That it's never going to capture the spirit of wandering around in your costume and whoever you bump into, at a con.
Yeah.
It's just not
That's
going to
true.
be. It's not going to be the same. Are you having another tremor there?
no, sorry, no, I was writing
You can
something
make the
down to
effect.
keep
Oh,
in the
okay. All right.
notes.
I was going to say,
The
looked
camera.
like you were on the move. Yeah. But in terms of panels, we can reach out. I focus on on trying to reach to the people that you wouldn't normally find at a con.
Right.
You know, at a
Right.
con, they're gonna bring in the headliners, and you're gonna get a minute while you pay $300 for an autograph and ask one question and move on, or you go and sit in a panel. But I'm trying to focus on the makers and the creators and the history people. You know, we had, as I say, we had one where I brought in the former managing director of 20th Century Fox to talk about the making of Star Wars and other movies he'd made, and I also had Craig, who was the first director of fan relations that started Banter Tracks and all of that stuff, about the history of how those things got started, how this amazing thing that we all call Star Wars and Lucasfilm, you know, where it came from, because it certainly wasn't, you know, that huge thing when we wandered around in the Mos Eisley Cantina and thought that we were making a movie for teenagers.
Right, right. I think James Earl Jones didn't even want to be in the credits of the original.
I don't think it was that he didn't want. He was a voiceover, and he wasn't in the credits for the first 2 movies.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, it was Sir Alec Guinness thought he was going to get typecast.
No, I don't
You
think
did.
he did.
You did.
I don't think he did. I spent quite a lot of that time talking to Sir Alec, because, you know, for me, the thrill of making that movie was working with Alec Guinness, not working with George Lucas. And
Yes.
you know, I sat and talked to him about all kinds of different things. And I think the bottom line with that was that he thought it was a rather silly, superficial movie, which most of the crew did. I mean, honestly, this is a 1976 movie about gunslingers and wizards in space. I mean, who was going to take that seriously? This is like something out of a kid's comic book. And so everyone assumed that that was what it was, until it became something else. It changed the style of movies that were made. But I think the thing with Sir Alec was that he made so many movies and played so many different characters that he felt were being overshadowed by this one movie, and so he got almost offended by the fact that he got so much acclaim for this one character, which he kind of knocked off in a very casual fashion.
And people never went and watched, The Bridge over the River Kwai. You know, I mean, there's some things that I think artistically he was very proud of, and this was not really one of them.
Over the River Kwai was a really good one, but go back even further to the Ealing Studios movies the Lady Killers, and you know, all of those old black and white movies that were extraordinary performances.
Do you remember what was the name?
He was sort of the. Go ahead.
I was going to say, what was the name of the movie where he played like 8 of the different 8 characters in one movie?
The Kind Hearts and Coronets. He did that.
Yeah. That's unbelievable.
I feel like he was the anchor star for Star Wars. You know, like they have those veterans. You know, you have a small
Patrick Stewart in Star Trek.
Peter Cushing was another one, because he was a big Hammer horror.
Right.
Man, his stuff. Oh, whew. I tell you what, I remember watching Star Wars for the first time. My dad saw Peter Cushing on screen. He was like, "You're kidding me." It's like, no kidding. I was like, what? He's like, don't you remember Dracula? I'm like, what?
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
So guys, we said goodbye twice. I guess we're going to call it quits for today. And if you want me back to talk about anything else,
we'd love that.
I'd be happy to do it another day.
Sounds great.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. It's been an honor.
Absolutely.
It's been a lot of fun.
Having been a Comic-Con veteran, I guess, because my wife and I had a booth there for years, and we would go, we would play a game where we'd say, who are we going to meet this weekend? And we wouldn't go to the hall. No, we wouldn't go to Hall H. We would try to set it up so that we could meet or bump into these people on the floor. And we met people like Ray Harryhausen. We sat with the Kyoto brothers and just talked and chatted with Ray Harryhausen. And it was a life-changing moment. You know, we met Adam Savage. We met John Howe, who was one of the designers on Lord of the Rings. And he was walking, and I said, John, you're John Howe. And he says, you recognize me? So I sat and talked with him for a while. And, you know, if you guys, once Corona's done, if you can go to these conventions and just be, it's a lot of fun to interact with these people. And if you can't, you can go to things like these virtual cons.
One of my sponsors is Prop Store. And so any convention that they go to, I can go hang out.
That's great. I mean, Prop Store, actually, a funny thing, Nick, is Prop Store is right here in Valencia where I live, one of their warehouses.
That's right.
So I have to be so very careful to ignore them as much as I possibly can.
Oh yeah, because you'll go by and you know your wife's like, "What is this bill on the credit card?" You say,
right, I know.
Nothing. There's nothing on that bill.
And you know, both of those guys just started out as collectors. They you know, it was estimated this last auction that they did, you know, that they were going to turn over $6 to $8 million worth of stuff.
The stuff they had was unbelievable.
Right? And they got another one in December. The one they did was in Valencia, and they got another one in London in another few weeks. So they really cooking with gas right now.
Oh, and I told them, I said, I love you guys and I hate you guys.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we get the love, but why do you hate us? And I smiled and I said, because you've made people realize that these things are worth something. I used to be able to get them.
Yeah.
Now they cost. Hey, I've got this obscure prop from a movie. I bet I could get tons of money for it. Well, I used to be able to just get them. But
right. Yeah. Now, well, not just the props, but the things that go into making the props. You know, like the parts that you need to. Like I used to be able to go on eBay and grab these things for cheap. More. Yeah. But
such is
very
life.
True.
Yep.
Such is life.
Well, it was a pleasure, and I look forward to when we can talk to you again. And
thanks for asking me.
Oh, certainly. As a matter of fact, we'd love to do it again if you ever get the time.
Sure.
We would love to just talk shop. It's one of the things that we like to do because we're both avid makers, and sharing that tradition and passing on sort of a lineage of builders. I think that speaks to why we do this and why we do it. And to sort of wrap things up, your vision of encouraging others to reach and grow and build and test the waters they've never been in. It is so much to what inspired this podcast to begin with.
It really is. It really is. I want to thank everybody for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, then make sure you click the links below because there's so much more to hear and find out, especially on Nick's connections. You've got Facebook and YouTube, the Starnet down below, as well as tune in for next time. We've always got new guests coming and lots of fun stuff to share. So thank you all very much. See you next time.